The oppressive midday sun of Andalusia beat down on Mateo Serrano's rental car, turning the air shimmering above the cracked asphalt into a hazy mirage. Dust, fine as talc, coated everything: the gnarled olive trees, the whitewashed walls of the sparse farmhouses, and the ancient, sun-baked sign that read, Belmez de la Moraleda. He gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, the air conditioning doing little to dispel the prickle of dread crawling up his spine. Belmez. The name itself was a raw wound. A place he'd fled 2 decades ago, trading its suffocating superstitions for the sterile logic of forensic science. As a former art fraud investigator for the Spanish Civil Guard, Mateo had built a formidable career on debunking the impossible, on stripping away the veil of false miracles and forged relics with the cold, hard facts of chemistry and physics. He was a rationalist, a man who believed only in what he could see, measure, and prove. His past, particularly the whispered tales and fervent beliefs of his childhood in rural Andalusia, was a ghost he thought he'd long since laid to rest. Then came the email, anonymous, terrifying. It contained a single, high-resolution photograph. The floor of a humble, concrete-floored kitchen, covered in the infamous, indelible faces of Belmez. But among the familiar, shifting visages, a new one had appeared, horribly clear, unmistakable. It was Isabel, his younger sister, Dr. Isabel Serrano, a parapsychologist whose dedication to the scientific study of the supernatural was as unwavering as Mateo's commitment to its debunking. Her face, etched into the very fabric of the concrete, was a mask of silent terror, her wide eyes staring out from the grainy texture as if pleading for help. Isabel had vanished 2 weeks ago. She'd come to Belmez with a new suite of sensory equipment, convinced she could finally prove, scientifically, that the faces were real. The local police, overwhelmed, and perhaps secretly convinced themselves, had no leads. Now, Mateo had his lead, and it was screaming. He parked the car in front of Calle Real 5, a modest 2-story house, no different from its neighbors, save for the morbid curiosity that drew tourists and true believers alike. The sun, a malevolent eye, glared down from a bleached sky. The silence was heavy, broken only by the buzz of cicadas and the distant tinny peal of church bells. The air itself felt thick, pregnant with unspoken secrets and the scent of parched earth. As he approached the front door, it opened a crack. A woman, her face pale and etched with worry, peered out. She was mid-40s, with dark, anxious eyes that darted nervously from Mateo to the empty street. "Señor Serrano?" she asked, her voice a reedy whisper. "I am Mana, the owner of the house. I heard you were coming." Mateo nodded, his gaze sweeping past her into the dim interior. "My sister, Isabel. Have you seen her?" Ana wrung her hands. "No, Señor. Not since she first arrived. She was so determined, so brave. Too brave, perhaps." She gestured for him to enter, her movements hesitant. "The police, they were useless. They just spoke of pilgrimages and the wrath of God." Inside, the air was cooler, but no less suffocating. The house smelled of damp earth, old plaster, and something else, a faint, cloying sweetness that reminded Mateo, disturbingly, of decay. Ana led him into the kitchen, the room made famous by the phenomenon. His breath hitched, the faces, they were everywhere, not just on the floor, but subtly, in the patterns of discolored plaster on the walls, in the grains of the old wooden table. They were abstract, fleeting, like smoke, but undeniably there. And on the concrete floor, amidst the swirling, shifting visages, was times her, times face. Isabel, just as in the photograph, her terror frozen in porous stone. Mother of God, Anna whispered, crossing herself. Another one, and so clear. She seemed genuinely distressed, her hands trembling as she pointed to the floor. They say they are the unquiet dead, souls who cry out from the earth itself. Matteo knelt, ignoring Anna, pulling a small portable forensic kit from his bag. He donned latex gloves and carefully examined the concrete. These aren't painted, he muttered, more to himself than to Anna. No pigment residue, no discernible surface alteration. The aggregate itself seems to have shifted. He pulled out a magnifying glass, then a microspectrometer. His instruments hummed, coolly analytical, in stark contrast to the medieval fear that permeated the room. Anna watched him, her eyes wide. "What are you doing, senor?" "Looking for answers," Matteo replied, his voice clipped. "My sister isn't a ghost story, Anna. She's a missing person." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "Tell me everything. Where did Isabel sleep? What did she say? Did she meet anyone?" Anna hesitated, then launched into a rambling account of Isabel's brief stay. She spoke of Isabel's excitement, her array of sensors, her theories about psychic energy. She also spoke, with hushed reverence, of Father Lorenzo. "He's a holy man," Anna insisted, her eyes fixed on Matteo's. "From a very old order. He came here often, to pray over the house, to bless it. He believes the faces are a sacred manifestation, God's stigmata on the earth." Matteo felt a jolt of alarm, a holy man who saw his sister's scientific inquiry as blasphemy. This was no miracle worker. This was a potential fanatic. "Where can I find this, Father Lorenzo?" Anna wrung her hands again. "He holds his services in the old chapel on the outskirts of the village, but he is private. He does not take kindly to outsiders, especially those who doubt." As Anna spoke, Matteo noticed something subtle. Her eyes, though seemingly terrified, held a flicker of something else, a deep-seated conviction, almost zealotry, that belied her outward timidity, and a faint, almost imperceptible scent of iron, like old blood, clung to her clothes. He filed it away, his investigator's mind ticking. He spent the rest of the day meticulously examining the house, taking samples, running tests. The instruments yielded nothing definitive, only a baffling series of anomalous energy fluctuations and inexplicable chemical alterations in the concrete. The faces remained, mocking his rationalism. As dusk settled, painting the village in hues of fiery orange and deep violet, the shadows within the house grew long and distorted. Matteo kept working, driven by a desperate urgency. He heard things then, faint whispers, like dry leaves skittering across a tombstone. Accusations, almost inaudible, that seemed to coalesce from the very air. He dismissed them as auditory fatigue, the psychological toll of stress and exhaustion. But the image of Isabel's terrified face on the floor burned in his mind. Later, as he was packing up his equipment, he saw it. On the kitchen wall, where a faded photograph of Anna's grandmother hung, a new face began to bloom, slowly pushing through the plaster like a grisly flower. It was not Isabel's, but a gaunt, sorrowful countenance, its eyes sunken, its mouth open in a silent scream. Matteo stumbled back, his rational mind reeling. This was beyond charlatanry, beyond simple chemical tricks. This was impossible. "It's getting stronger, isn't it?" Anna said from the doorway, her voice now devoid of its earlier timidity, replaced by a chilling calmness. "The griever, your sister's interference, her machines, they agitated it. It wants something. It wants appeasement." Her eyes, in the dim light, seemed to glow with an unnerving fervor. "The griever? Matteo asked, his voice hoarse. What are you talking about? The sorrow of the grave soil, Anna explained, stepping fully into the room, her shadow long and distorted behind her. This house, Senor Serrano, sits atop a place of unimaginable suffering, an unconsecrated cemetery. Victims of the plague, perhaps. Or the Inquisition. Souls denied proper burial, proper mourning. Their grief seeped into the very earth, into the foundations of my family's home. She paused, then her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. Father Lorenzo understands. He knows what must be done to quiet them, to sanctify this place. Matteo felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. The pieces clicked into place, the zealotry, the vague answers, the iron scent, and now this sudden shift in Anna's demeanor. You're with him, aren't you? Anna smiled, a strange, beatific expression that twisted her features. I serve the will of God, Senor Serrano, and Father Lorenzo is his instrument. Your sister. She was too close to the truth. She was blaspheming holy ground. Before Matteo could react, Anna lunged. She was stronger than she looked, fueled by a terrifying conviction. She grappled with him, her nails raking his face. Matteo, surprised, struggled, but she managed to pin him against the doorframe, reaching for something hidden in her apron. He twisted, throwing her off balance, and she fell, her head striking the corner of the table with a sickening thud. She lay still, a thin trickle of blood blooming on the concrete floor. Matteo didn't wait to check on her. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that Isabel was in grave danger. Anna's words about a ritual, about appeasement, echoed in his mind. He scanned the room, his eyes falling on an old heavy rug in a corner. Beneath it, he found a crudely cut trapdoor, its edges rough and splintered. He pulled it open. A gust of damp, earthy air, heavy with the scent of decay, wafted up from the darkness below. Ancient stone steps, slick with moisture, descended into an abyss. This was it, the hidden crypt. He grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight from his kit and descended, his footsteps echoing ominously in the suffocating silence. The air grew colder, wetter, each breath a struggle. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. Accusations, laments, the sound of weeping. He saw faces in the damp walls, in the glistening slime, their eyes hollow, their mouths agape. He pushed past the encroaching despair, fueled by a primal fear for his sister. The steps opened into a vast circular chamber, clearly pre-Christian in origin. It was a crypt, indeed, but one far older than any church. Ancient, rough-hewn pillars supported a low, vaulted ceiling, and niches in the walls held crude effigies of forgotten deities. Bones, bleached and brittle, were stacked in orderly piles against the walls, interspersed with shards of pottery and fragments of cloth. In the center of the crypt, illuminated by flickering torchlight, stood Father Lorenzo. He was a gaunt, imposing man, in dark robes, his face severe, his eyes burning with an almost manic intensity. Two figures in similar robes, acolytes, stood at his side, and before them, bound to an ancient stone slab, was Isabel. Her face was pale, streaked with dirt and tears, but her eyes, though wide with fear, still held a spark of defiant intelligence. She met Matteo's gaze, a flicker of hope igniting in her eyes. "Blasphemer!" Father Lorenzo's voice boomed, echoing off the ancient stone, startling Matteo. He hadn't realized he'd been seen. "You defile this sacred ground with your doubt, your scientific hubris." "Lorenzo," Matteo growled, stepping fully into the light, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. "Let her go. Now." "Never." Lorenzo raised a cruel obsidian knife, its tip glinting in the torchlight.
She sought to profane the miracle, to deny the voices of the unquiet dead.
Only through purification, through an offering, can their suffering be appeased, and this ground made holy. He gestured around the crypt. The griever awakens, Senor Serrano. It thirsts for justice, for mourning denied. As if on cue, the ground beneath them began to tremble. A low, guttural moan resonated through the crypt, seeming to emanate from the very stone. The faces on the walls, previously static, began to shift and contort, their expressions morphing from sorrow to rage. The whispers escalated into a cacophony of wails and accusations, assaulting Mateo's mind. From the deepest part of the crypt, where the packed earth met the ancient stone, something began to stir. A fissure opened in the floor, oozing a thick, viscous mud. Bones, ancient and yellowed, began to push their way through, clattering against each other. "The griever!" Lorenzo cried, his eyes wild with a terrifying joy. "It comes to judge!" A form began to coalesce from the grave soil, the human bones, and the wet concrete. It was slow, lumbering, and terrifyingly vast. An ossuary golem, its skin, a patchwork of shifting, weeping faces, each one a silent scream of forgotten agony. Its eyes, deep-set hollows, glowed with an ancient, sorrowful light. It rose, towering over them, a monument to 1,000 years of unmourned dead, its concrete limbs thick and powerful, wet soil dripping from its massive frame. The air grew heavy with a crushing despair, an overwhelming wave of grief that threatened to buckle Mateo's knees. Isabel, bound on the slab, whimpered, not in fear of the monster, but from the psychic assault of its presence. The golem moved, slowly but unstoppably, toward Lorenzo first, its massive hand rising. Lorenzo, instead of fleeing, threw himself to his knees, his arms outstretched, chanting wildly, "Accept our offering! Accept the sacrifice!" Mateo knew he couldn't fight this thing with his fists. His scientific mind, shattered by the impossibility of the last few hours, was now desperately seeking a solution. He watched the golem, trying to understand its weakness. It was made of earth, concrete, and bones. Wet. Then he saw it. As the golem lumbered past one of the crypt's ancient walls, a fragment of its concrete skin scraped against a section of exposed lime mortar. The creature recoiled slightly, a low, keening sound emanating from its myriad faces. Lime, or mortar, quicklime, calcium oxide. A memory flashed through Mateo's mind. His grandfather, a gruff old farmer, speaking of quicklime pits used during the plague to dispose of victims, its violent exothermic reaction with water, its searing, destructive power. He remembered the historical accounts, the rapid desiccation, the way it could turn flesh to powder. He scanned the crypt frantically. In a dark corner, half hidden by stacked bones, he saw them several rough-hewn sacks filled with a coarse white powder, quicklime, probably used centuries ago for sanitation or construction, long forgotten. "Isabel!" Mateo yelled, his voice raw. "Cover your eyes!" He sprinted towards the sacks, dodging a sweeping blow from the golem that shattered an ancient pillar with a deafening roar. Lorenzo, still chanting, oblivious, believed the creature was merely testing them. The acolytes, terrified, were cowering in the shadows. Mateo tore open a sack, coughing as the fine, caustic dust filled the air. He scooped up handfuls of the quicklime, his hands burning slightly. The golem turned its attention to Isabel, its massive hand reaching for her. Lorenzo screamed, a mixture of triumph and fear, believing the sacrifice was about to be completed. "No!" Mateo roared, launching himself forward, throwing the quicklime at the towering monster. The white dust, reacting violently with the golem's wet concrete and grave soil skin, hissed and steamed. The golem roared, a horrifying chorus of 1,000 voices, a sound of agony and rage. The faces on its body contorted, stretched, then began to harden, rapidly calcifying. The heat, generated by the exothermic reaction, was intense, visibly steaming off the creature. The golem thrashed, its movements becoming erratic and frantic, as if trying to tear itself apart. Matteo threw more quicklime, aiming for the core of the creature, for the wettest, most unstable parts of its form. The chemical reaction accelerated. The golem's once malleable body stiffened, cracking, crumbling from within. The faces on its surface froze in expressions of eternal agony, then began to shatter. With a final, ear-splitting scream of 1,000 unquiet souls, the ossuary golem exploded, not in a shower of gore, but in a violent geyser of crumbling concrete, dry earth, and shattered bones. The force of the explosion ripped through the crypt. Father Lorenzo, caught in the devastating psychic feedback and the physical blast, screamed not of piety, but of pure, unadulterated terror, his body spasming as if struck by lightning. He collapsed, his eyes wide and lifeless, his face covered in the white caustic dust. The acolytes, terrified, fled into the darkness. Matteo, though singed and battered, rushed to Isabel. He cut her bonds with the obsidian knife Lorenzo had dropped, pulling her into his arms. "Are you all right?" Isabel nodded, shaking, her eyes wide. What was that?" "Science," Matteo gasped. "And something else. Something I don't understand." The crypt began to collapse around them, stone groaning, earth raining down. The unholy clamor of the griever had been silenced, but the structure itself was failing. Matteo half-carried, half-dragged Isabel up the treacherous steps, the whispers now fading into distant echoes, the faces on the walls crumbling to dust. They emerged from the trapdoor into the kitchen, gasping for breath, as the first rays of the harsh Spanish dawn broke through the windows. The house was silent, save for their ragged breaths. On the concrete floor, where Isabel's terrified face had been, there was now only a faint, indeterminate stain. All the faces, the old ones and the new, had faded to nothing, as if they had never been. Matteo looked at his sister, then at the empty, ordinary floor. His rational world had been shattered, blown apart by grief made manifest, by fanatics and impossible beings. But he had saved his sister. He had confronted the past, the superstition, and the terrifying truth. And he had done it not by abandoning science, but by twisting it, by using its cold, hard facts to fight the impossible. The skeptic had saved the believer, and in doing so, had found himself irrevocably changed. "Let's go home, Isabel," he said, his voice hoarse, pulling her close. "We have a lot to talk about." As they stepped out of the house and into the harsh, new light of dawn, the village of Belmez de la Moraleda seemed to shimmer, no longer with heat, but with a lingering, unsettling silence. The secrets beneath the earth had retreated, for now. But Matteo knew, with a certainty that was both chilling and profound, that some truths could never be fully buried.